So thanks, Terry. All right, so it's been a long day. I think I'm the last speaker today, the last real speaker for today. So I want to give you a little real-life example of how 2110 is used today in real examples. So I will talk a little about NEP. So my name is Lucas. I'm working for Lawo as technical product manager. I'm focused on the audio production side, so that's why it fits perfectly in here. And so a few years ago, we started what we call Broadcast 3.0. So Broadcast 3.0 refers to using IP for broadcast production. So anticipating that Broadcast 1.0 was analog, 2.0 digital, and now we're talking about the IP domain. And I really like the topic because it really fits in very well with what all the companies are doing right now, and the basic idea how we as a company define Broadcast 3.0 is actually going well beyond what Lawo is doing. So the idea is to have a vendor agnostic approach that is not only specifically about Lawo. And I already have to mention about, you will see some nice pictures about NEP, and this is really not specifically about Lawo. So there's a lot of different vendors involved with the NEP projects, and we are just like a small brick in the overall house they built. And yeah, based on 2110, it all works and it all comes together. So what is SMPTE 2110? So actually I won't talk too much about ST2110 because I assume that everyone in this audience here is at least in a way familiar with what 2110 is. If not, well, you're in the perfect spot. There are a lot of people around to ask. I'm available at the Lawo booth or also here, or Andreas, you learned about him just before. So let's do not dive deep into what 2110 is. What I want to clarify up front is, because my presentation titles Centralized Production, but what is Centralized Production? So in the end, there are different words for the same action that is going on. Some call it Centralized Production. In the US, the term REMI is quite familiar. A lot of people call it remote production or cloud production. And actually, while there are some smaller specific things about each of those terms, they all refer to a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is having distributed systems. So not having all the gear in one spot, but distributing things around, utilizing IP, and then bringing it back together. So as I mentioned already, I want to give an insight a little bit about NEP in the Netherlands. So NEP was Lawo's very first customer that focused on centralized production. They had their facility and still have it in Hilversum, which is just in front of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Back in the days when they started that project, it was called Infostrada, and then being bought by NEP at some point, so something, well, they like doing that. And they really were upfront on doing centralized production. So as you can see, they started a full mesh, bringing around the gear that is required for a full production workflow. So they have a cloud production data center. They have spots for shading, for control. They have galleries for PCRs and audio. And while, of course, there's a lot of all of that in the same spot, so the whole middle part is located in Hilversum, they can connect that to remote locations. So they can have a stadium somewhere in the Netherlands, they can have a gallery somewhere, and that's really the idea about centralized production. So yeah, we have a data, NEP calls it data hotel, so that's in the basement of one of the studios in Hilversum. This is of course where all the magic happens. So this is where the backend for the vision mixer is, where the core for the mixing console is located, etc., etc. In addition to that, of course, they need to have some inputs. Somewhere we have to connect our microphones, we have to connect our cameras, and this is why they built quite advanced AV stage boxes, and this is how they look like. So they have some SDI inputs, they have some microphone inputs, and those stage boxes then connect back via fiber to the data hotel in Hilversum. So wherever they place them in the Netherlands, they will connect back to the data center in Hilversum. In Hilversum, they have their PCRs. So in the meantime, there are 6 PCRs available in Hilversum. They're really quite nice laid out so that people feel comfortable there. And they don't have to travel around to go into that PCR. So while there's like a sprinter, a bully going around and bringing the stage box into place, the people are going into their familiar environment. So it's like they're really going to work. They're not traveling to the production place. Same applies for SCR, of course. So there are several sound control rooms around in Hilversum, and they're manageable the same way as PCRs. So sound control rooms and PCRs can be assigned to a production using the broadcast control system. And yeah, coming back to that picture, they really built an exceptional facility in Hilversum, and this is what was really kind of the first thing that we saw that was using these kind of workflows. Well, NEP did not stop with doing that. I think a very, very exciting and popular project is NEP The Hub in Australia. And they kind of did the same thing there, but even on a bigger scale. And again, the main idea behind that was to save travel costs, to leave people where they are living, to just make the whole broadcast process also more friendly for families. And that's been kind of the major driver behind the NEP Australia project. So not to make people travel around Australia, which is really like a big country, not to make Obi trucks have to be circled around, but to have all the back end in either Melbourne or Sydney and just connect to the remote location. So from my perspective, NEP really managed to create a toolbox full of bricks, and based on the bricks they have, they built together the workflow and the requirements each and every of their customers has in the end. So it's really easy for them to adapt. They have a versatile system, and they have one of the most powerful production spaces all around. So coming back to 2110 and why does it matter? So, well, of course, all these things could be done with traditional workflows on baseband, but if we think about it, 2110 is really like the missing piece in the puzzle to enable and make it easy and make it scalable. So if you look on that diagram, we can see that 2110 is really the thing that brings the stuff together. So we have our venue location, we have a stage box, we have some video I/O, and the whole thing connects back together into the data hotel, to the SCR, to the PCR. Of course, there might be a lot of people saying, okay, well, that's in theory quite nice and cool, but what if I don't have a network link between my venue and my facility back home? So in the end, that's not that kind of a big problem. So I do not have a network transmission channel, but I do have some kind of transmission channel in between. So it is either using satellite, so SDI in the end, or it's using a Nimbra connection, so I might feed in some MADI, but that does not really stop the main idea behind it. So while of course we rely on 2110 and 2110 enables more possibilities, we can do the same thing with an SDI transmission channel, with a MADI transmission channel. And that's quite important because it makes you and your application just more versatile. And that brings me to an point that from my perspective is quite interesting and also quite important in nowadays, where we all have to look at costs, where we all have to look at return of investment. And for me, I call that, let's avoid dedicated hardware. So if I'm buying a box, in the old days it was always like, okay, I bought a AES free to MADI converter box. It could do that job. It made it better or worse, but it could do that job. If I needed an analog to MADI conversion box, I needed another box. And this is really, today we're seeing a lot of hardware that can do its job based on software definition. So taking that example, we have a device that is doing 2110-30, but at the same time it does MADI. It can do AES-free, and with a little help, it can also enable SDI. So it does I/O, which is the complete lower row there. It can do conversion between different formats. We can do some local mixing, and we can do some monitoring. So this is really like pushing in a direction where I might buy a 1RU box that I can use in very different scenarios. So maybe I need some conversion today. I only need it from analog to 2110 because I have a 2110 transmission channel. Tomorrow I also need some local monitoring, so some local IFBs. Oh cool, I can use the same box. It's just a different configuration or maybe a different firmware, but it's still the same box. Same applies, of course, for the video side of things, in the same way as it does for audio. So maybe I have a device that can do 2110-20, so video over IP. It can do -30, so some audio. It can do old style 2022-6, SDI over IP. It can really do SDI. So if I need some conversion, I already have quite a lot of things covered. So gateway conversion, up-down cross. Maybe I get a local 4K feed, but I only have enough bandwidth for a 3G transmission, or some multi-viewing. And same as it applied for the audio device we saw before. It's again always the same box. It's just based on software that features powerful FPGA inside, and I tell the device what to do with that. So taking it all together, so having hardware that is not only dedicated for one job, having a transmission channel in between my locations, and in the end having 2110 enabled, you can really start pushing the limits. And the really cool thing about working with NEP is they always find a way to push the limits. So of course this is nothing exclusive to NEP, so I can see some friends from SVT, from SR, from ULE. That's really a nice thing about my job, because I always can get in touch with our customers, and they always in their way find out how to push limits. In that example, what did NEP do? So they found out, okay, maybe this whole centralized production thing is cool. I have my data hotel back in Hilversum, but sometimes there's just not enough network in between to do that, to go for that approach. So, well, they said, okay, let's build a mobile data center unit. So in the end, that's a back-end container that can be carried around, and if I don't have enough bandwidth to connect back to the data hotel, I just place that one. And I have my backend for the vision mixer, for the mixing console, right there on site. That's not yet the real big improvement. It's just another brick in the game. But what I found really interesting and exciting at this year's IBC show was the first official introduction of the IOB 11. So what is the NEP IOB 11? It's a mobile PCR container. So I can have my production control room wherever I want to have it. Because the downside of doing centralized production with only having my stage box on site is I might lose that portion that is required for a creative process. So while a real remote production scenario might be fine for like the weekly football games, if I'm doing an award show, I want to have my director, my vision mixer, and most likely my graphics people being on site because they're involved with the overall creative process on site. So what to do? Do I have to again bring back an OB truck just because I need my PCR there? And that's what was the thinking that NEP had. So they introduced this PCR container. It can be carried on a 12 tons truck and just moved out in the space where the production happens in the end. And boom, I have all the things that I need there. So I have a full-featured PCR. I have my vision mixer and some further working spaces. And looking back to that graphic, well, on site, they now not only have their stage boxes, their video IOs, their cameras, but also the PCR. Yeah, NEP is also still building trucks, and this is of course a good question. So what about trucks? NEP Europe built 2 major new trucks in the UHD trucks in the last year. So one is located in Sweden and one in the Netherlands. And of course there are still productions where an OB makes more sense than centralized production. And this will be the case for some further years. And in the end, for me, it's just yet another piece in the puzzle. Because I can extend it with my stage boxes, I can connect the truck back to the data hotel to extend my resources. But yeah, there are just scenarios where it makes sense. So, from my perspective, why does it matter 2110? It just enables this whole game. It's just this building block. And funny enough, if you're looking at the latest IABM special report that was shown at the IBC in Amsterdam, and looking at strategic drivers of purchase, the first 3 mentioned there, so makes us more efficient and saves money. So people want to have things that makes them more efficient and saves money. Well, that's like the non-dedicated hardware stuff, right? Total cost of ownership, not moving people around, so centralized production. Makes us more agile, responsive to market changes. It's exactly the same thing. And the last one, the 4th one I really like, it's interoperable with other products. So, of course we can say AES free and SDI is interoperable in those days. But we are all working very hard on pushing that on another level from the vendor point of view. So you might have heard about the GTNM tester program. If not, IFGAN is doing some presentations also here at the Ames corner. A lot of vendors sat down together in August at Riedel in Wuppertal to test their equipment against each other. And if you fulfilled certain requirements, you got this GTNM tested button that you could stick on your products, and IP devices submitted for testing that passed, approved and published at IBC. So there's like this catalog that you can download on the GTNM webpage where you can really see which product is compliant to which standard. More or less last but not least is the IP adoption tracker, and I just like that chart because it changed over the years, and this is the very recent one from the IBC 2019. So who's doing IP or who is thinking about adopting IP? And as you can see, well, it's more or less decided. There's no way back. There are a lot of people that are already doing it, more than 20%, more than nearly 40% will do it very, very soon. And it just makes us all more powerful. And that leads me more or less to my last slide, which is people, innovation, product, vision, and passion. And one thing that I investigated over the last years based on 2110 and IP is that really vendors were really, again, forced to talk more to each other, and that partnerships across vendors, across customers growed. So yeah, that was it from my side. If you have some questions about 2110, Andreas is the guy to ask. If you have some questions about NEP or what Lawo is doing, just step by our booth or talk to me. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining these sessions today. I know it hasn't been often easy to hear what's going on with all the competition in this hall. I'm afraid that's totally out of our control. So that's the end of our live presentations today, and just for this last half hour, we're going to replay a video that was recorded at the IBC show last month, and it was a presentation by the BBC about their new BBC Cardiff facility, which is a very cutting-edge facility.